Electric cars are easy to drive, only 2 pedals, and even more important, they're quiet and inexpensive to run. Refueling means plugging into a handy electric socket to recharge batteries. In a few years, there's the strong prospect of seeing millions of them on the roads. Convenient motoring is the dream of every car owner in Britain.
There was a change in people's approaches to electric cars in the late 90s, where rather than being this sort of weird science experiment, instead they did the conversion sympathetically to the car and they made them look great. And I thought, oh, I can do that too. I can make conversions affordable by using second-hand electric car equipment, and haven't really looked back since then. We are London Electric Cars. We started in 2017. We're a garage with a difference.
What is it? Well, it's the city car, an all-electric, non-polluting automobile that could be a prototype vehicle of the future.
We think it's very practical.
Well, are you looking to save some money on gas? Well, one way to save is to drive a car that doesn't need it.
How will the running costs compare with an ordinary petrol or diesel car?
Oh, it'll be only half. We think it's the car of the future.
So, welcome to London Electric Cars. This is our main arch, where we do the majority of our work.
Does that turn on?
It does, I believe. Oh, there you go. Yeah. It's an absolute pleasure to work on classic cars. I hope that we can get to the point where we can also offer people the opportunity to convert more modern stuff, because the reality is there's millions of Ford Fiestas on the road, Vauxhall Corsas, and we need to find some kind of solution for those. Do we convert any cars? Yes, we will convert any car. There are 40 million vehicles in the UK. Are we going to scrap half of them? Well, if we're not going to scrap half of them, then we need a solution, and that solution is to convert them. So the reason you're seeing a lot of 1960s, 1970s, 1950s cars is because they're just a lot more basic. You know, there's no power steering and no power brakes on a lot of them, certainly no ABS. And so the process of conversion is a lot more simple, which in the long run makes it a lot cheaper and quicker, and hopefully makes conversions that bit more accessible. And we've got a Fiat Multipla. It's got a Nissan Leaf motor in it, and this is a really good example of the sort of conversions that we can do. Custom drive shafts. We basically mount the motor stack in the engine bay, connect up to the wheels, and off you go. Certain cars suit conversions more than other cars, and the Fiat Multipla is unusual in that it was almost like it was designed to be converted, in that the motors fit beautifully into the engine bay. Over here, you've got a Nissan Leaf motor. We use components from a Nissan Leaf, predominantly because they're, until recently, the only electric car made in the UK. And one of our main focuses is on how we can reduce the cost of conversions. Being one of the only electric cars made in the UK and being a mass market car, and until recently it was the most produced electric car, it's also the cheapest source of parts. So we look out for Nissan Leafs that have been involved in accidents that we can buy on the cheap. Parts that come from a salvage car tend to be anything up to a quarter the price. You can see the naked batteries here, Nissan Leaf cells. And one of the things we spent an awful lot of time developing is our ability to take Nissan Leaf modules out of the Nissan Leaf battery box and put them into our own battery boxes. With electric cars, because there's so fewer moving parts, you've just got a rotor that spins, supported by 2 bearings, and that's it. They don't wear out in the traditional sense in the way that a combustion engine might do. You know, they're good for 500,000, 1 million miles. You'll see we've got a bunch of rather eccentric cars in the garage at the moment. This is a Defender 90, quite common with our conversions. You'll see we've got a nice empty engine bay. We take cars apart, put it all back together again an awful lot so that we can test our various parts. So you've got Defender 90, you've got a Bond Bug here. This is a rather unusual 1970s car, 3-wheeler, so it takes advantage of certain things in London, like you can take it in the bus lanes. So here we continue our slightly esoteric car collection. This classic Mini is one of a few Minis we've done with a Nissan Leaf motor in it. The motors have around 110 brake horsepower and 210 foot-pounds of torque. When you put that into a classic Mini, you end up doubling the horsepower and tripling the torque. So you end up with a pretty wild package. So this is a Morris Traveller, and you've got a Nissan Leaf motor in here, and it's a really good example of us attaching an electric motor to a manual gearbox. The reason why we do that is it keeps a lot of the feel of the car. People don't want to change the car too much. You know, they might see the gearbox as being an integral part of the characteristic of the vehicle. It's considered unusual for electric cars because you get full torque from 0 RPM. So in most electric cars, you don't have a gear stick. Keeping the gearbox, you keep the sort of feel of the car, so you can still accelerate through the gears, you can still downshift into corners. But also it means we can use a slightly smaller electric motor. And it means also we're doing less to modify the car. You know, we just literally drop our electric motor in where the combustion engine used to be. And yeah, it maintains a lot of the historical integrity, you know, the feel of the car. This is really where we're heading for a lot of our conversions, is trying to maintain the original driveline as much as possible. Cool. This is our most recent arrival. It's a 1966 Lincoln Continental convertible. Its real party trick is what they call suicide doors. This is going to be a pretty epic conversion. This is a Bentley T2. These cars are famous for having an incredible amount of power. They had these enormous 6-litre engines. We get certain criticisms, oh my God, you've taken out this incredible engine from these cars. Well, these cars were sold on the idea of reliability, durability, being quiet, and that's what we're bringing to it now. You know, you don't need to worry about, is the car going to start first thing in the morning, because electric motors start first time every time. Stick an electric motor in them and they're closer to that promise than they were when they were originally built. And it's really genuinely going to be quiet now. So conversions bring an awful lot to the party, and added to the fact that you'll continue to be able to enjoy them driving around central London for many decades to come. The owner of this car has had the car for a couple decades. It is a cherished family car. He just wants his lovely family car converted to electric. You know, cars are strange in that they become part of the narrative of someone's life. Significant moments have happened, and those vehicles have been part of those moments. They've driven you to the hospital for the birth of your first child. They might have driven that child to their first wedding, or maybe they were your first car, or a car you've had for a particularly long time. And so there's an emotional attachment there. And also there's an understanding that in a lot of those cars, there's nothing particularly wrong with them. The seats are still great, the air conditioning still works great. I use it in such a fashion now that I potter around town in it. Then there's a really strong argument to turn it electric. And at the moment, the only obstacle for that is the cost of the process. Get that out of the way for you. So that's my football gear on the front seat. There you go. Cool. You know, where I live, it's a sort of little side street, and it's dead quiet, and then a car drives through it. And then, God forbid, it's like a noisy motorbike or something like that. Whereas an electric car drives through and it doesn't affect the acoustic environment. There's a really different mental impact from a car that makes no noise. It was really the pandemic that, there was no traffic all of a sudden in London. There were no trains, no planes, and the air was really clear. And then as soon as a diesel truck drove by for the first time, you're like, man, that stinks. And you become so immune to the smells of traffic, you don't notice them until it's all gone and suddenly one drives by you. Electric cars, one of their biggest advantages is in urban centres. They are a perfect solution. But even if you do get your power from, say, the worst coal-fired power stations, they're still more efficient than a petrol engine. They don't pollute in the areas where it's most problematic. And also, people regularly forget that to distill petrol, you use incredible amounts of electricity. To meet the UK's Paris climate obligations, we need to convert half of the cars in the UK to zero emissions. So 20 million cars need to be scrapped, in theory, or taken off the road or converted to electric. The reality is that half of a car's CO2 output happens in its manufacture. So if we're truly serious about reducing our CO2 output, the reality is we also need to consider that perhaps we can't be making new cars. In terms of us getting around central London right now, this is perfectly adequate. You know, this car has paid its dues in terms of CO2. To turn this electric is perhaps the ultimate recycling. But you don't need these sort of big gas guzzlers in central London, so why not sit in a nice classic car instead?